Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Paige Alexander.
Thank you. I did not bring a PowerPoint, so you're going to be stuck looking at me the whole time. I apologize for that, and I'm holding the mic so I don't use my hands too much. The reality is, when I talk to students and I think about a liberal arts training, as Kelly was saying, I wasn't formally trained in anything. I consider liberal arts sort of the beginning of what we decide we want to do in life. And so I'm going to divide this into 4 areas. One, what I assumed I would do when I was in high school. Secondly, what I thought I was going to do when I was in college. Third, what I became convinced I was going to do after my first job. And fourth, what I realized I wanted to do once I had some life experience. So I was fortunate enough to be here in Atlanta. I grew up here, went to a small private prep school. I had some great teachers. Now, STEM wasn't a thing back then for us. I loved science. I had the opportunity to dissect frogs and cats and became convinced that that's what I was going to do, except for the fact that I did not like needles or blood. So I thought, well, fortunately, marine biology, Sapelo Island, University of Georgia, had a program. I went down there and I thought, figuring out what the ecosystem would look like. So I thought for a while I was going to be a hard science major. Technology was not a thing in the 80s, really, so it wasn't as if that part of STEM was active. Engineering was not something that women did. And math, I decided that the need to do geometry and algebra and calculus was probably not going to pay off the rest of my life, and so was not going to have a lot of relevance, so I had ruled that out. But I had an amazing history teacher, and she sort of gave the through line of, from Ottoman Empire, Civil War, to civil rights, to everything that we were living through. And I thought, well, that's an interesting concept. Maybe history will be it. So I assumed my goal was to go to the best school I could get into, in the place that might be the most fun. So I went to New Orleans, and I went to Tulane and decided liberal arts was going to be my background. And I started taking classes. Now, again, you have to do all of your initial classes, your requirements, and once again decided math was not something I wanted to do. Started a business track and realized there's a lot of math involved in that, and so decided I didn't want to do that. But once I started taking courses, communication, psychology, sociology, I realized I was excellent at watching TV, was great at watching commercials and analyzing them, going to movies and analyzing them, and I thought, you can maybe make a living out of this. And I took a class that required we do commercials, case study commercials. And so Bayer aspirin was the one that I did, and I thought about what would an 18-year-old student need Bayer aspirin for, and did a whole commercial set on that. And it ended up taking off. People realized the commercials have to link to what individuals want to do, want to see in their life. And I thought, so communicating is an important element of this, tying it to the psychology and sociology of the generation that you're trying to appeal to. And I took a rhetorical criticism class, and I studied Nixon's checker speech, Jimmy Carter's malaise speech. Plot twist, the word malaise is not used anywhere in that speech. And I realized that words mattered. And I got a summer internship on Capitol Hill and worked for a senator. And I was going to work on with his speechwriter. And so I started figuring out how policy connected to writing. And so doing that, I also realized politics is a lot like a high school gossip game. You had to put the pieces together in a way that was something that made sense to people. So worked on speech writing for a little while. It happened to be during an election season, the summer before an election. I was working for a senator from the state of Massachusetts, so I was able to work on the particular campaign of that candidate at the time. I thought, well, politics is pretty fun, and campaigning is pretty fun, and that has a lot to do with words and putting policy together. And so I thought I was going to go political science route, but I would do it through campaigning, I could do it through commercials. So my first job after college ended up being with a polling firm and an advertising agency. So after doing 30 and 60-second spots for various candidates on policies, but not really policies, because we've all seen commercials, they don't talk a lot about policies, I decided that that was interesting, but I wasn't sure that's really what I wanted to do. And then the wall came down. Berlin Wall came down, 1989. Czechoslovakia opened up. I was dating someone who was writing a dissertation on the politics of economic adjustment, because he was doing economics, and I followed him to Czechoslovakia at the time. And that's when I realized what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. To walk into a transitioning society after having all the background that I had had from studying history, from being able to link and see the through line of history and how it repeats itself, I was able to start working with people on the ground. As my boyfriend, husband now, was working on the politics of economic adjustment, how coupons for privatization were changing the ecosystem of an entire country that truly had no idea how to be capitalist because they had lived under communism for so long. I watched how he dealt with people. I was dealing in the nonprofit sector. I was watching the Swedish government come in and say, oh, everyone needs typewriters. Well, if you've ever seen a Swedish keyboard, not something you can use in the English language or in Czech, so they donated all these typewriters that were sitting there moribund. I watched medical people come in and say they need oncology machines. Well, that's a great idea until you have to fix one. And that doesn't work so well if you've got no skill set to fix it in the hospitals. So I watched a lot of good ideas not be used well. The implementation of trying to help people on the ground was just not a connective tissue that people had. And so I was looking at all of this from a 30,000-foot view. I was watching medical professionals come in and say, this is what we need to do. I was watching do-good NGO people come in and say, we'll share all this information with them, and then we'll leave. And so I decided and realized that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on how transitioning economies worked socially, worked business-wise, through capitalism. So I had this wonderful experience and was able to live overseas, and that overseas experience also changed my life and opened up my worldview. Again, thinking back to everything I had done in sort of liberal arts studies, that was the space I wanted to occupy. So I come back and I'm working, I was able to work at Harvard and do some work there, and then got on a campaign because the campaign bug was still on my head, and ended up getting placed in the federal government after actually being on a winning campaign for a change, and ended up at the Agency for International Development. So to be able to do public service, to take foreign policy, and USAID is kind of the sister agency to the State Department. It does all the foreign development work in these countries. It follows the policy. It's part of the three-legged stool of development, diplomacy, and defense. And so to be able to take the foreign policy information that I had, take the on-the-ground experience that I have, and be able to link those two together was amazing to me. And so I started down a career of public service, much like DOD in my Department of Defense colleagues, thank you for your service. Being able to work as one of those three pillars was incredibly important, but I wouldn't have been able to do it if I had focused on engineering, if I had focused on science. I was able to do it because I had a 30,000-foot view. So I had a lot of really interesting experiences in government when I look at my colleagues from the military. You know, at one point, I sat in the White House Situation Room. We were talking about the Mosul Dam. Back in the day, we were worried that it was going to collapse, that ISIS was going to blow it up. It was going to wipe out all of Iraq. It was going to flow downhill, and the embassies in Baghdad would be destroyed. And then someone at the table said, well, why don't we just drain it? And everyone's at the table, all the cabinet level people are sitting at the table, and I'm back seating, and I'm looking like the hydrologists are there, everyone's there with technical expertise, and no one is saying anything because a senior level person said, well, why don't we just drain it? And I finally raised my hand and I said, because it will collapse on itself. If it goes down 3 inches, it will collapse on itself. And everyone's like, oh, okay. I'm not a hydrologist. I don't know how to do this. It was kind of the common sense moment of, Like, you can't drain a dam and think that it's going to be okay. It will collapse on itself. So I really feel like the fact I didn't know too much allowed me to see the forest through the trees. And that's what I think liberal arts does. I also have this with the Carter Center all the time. I wish I brought this picture. We had a wonderful, we work on guinea worm, eradicating, it will only be the second disease, human disease, ever eradicated. Smallpox was the first. And we did a cartoon it was in 21 different countries, guinea worm, and it's a waterborne disease. We did a cartoon where women were standing in the water collecting water, and we were trying to teach them the way to collect it is through a filter. But the water, of course, throughout Africa is dark and muddy, and so you couldn't see their feet. They became absolutely convinced that if they collected water that way, they would lose their feet. And it was just this cultural sensitivity that we didn't have. We're like, this is a cartoon. This is, of course, what people would see. And so being able to talk to the epidemiologist, talk to the people we were working with and say, no, we're actually doing this wrong. We're trying to teach something that is not culturally sensitive. And so all of that, in my mind, is how we work together. I could not do my job without CDC, without epidemiologists in my office, without people who understood deeply conflicts, historical nature of different conflicts in the world, without understanding what the human rights laws are. All of that works together with someone who, from my perspective, looks at the world through a 30,000-foot view. And so it is this moment in time that as students you all have to figure out, do you care so deeply about something that you want to focus in on it, or do you want to take a wider perspective and look broader and figure out what can I touch? What's going to be my passion? Because everyone has their own passion. It's just for me and for folks who I think do liberal arts, you get at least, you can be a mile wide and an inch deep until you decide you want to go a mile deep and an inch wide. And so that is sort of my story and the time that I've spent trying to figure out exactly how you link these pieces. I now have 3 kids. One of them works at the State Department. She was a presidential management fellow, and she had to do rotations at the State Department. So she was at USAID for a little bit. Her home office was State Department. And then I said, you've got to do the military. You have to have that third pillar to understand defense, diplomacy, and development. Because that is how you get a whole, full, rounded view of the area that you want to work in. Now, when I was in high school, did I think that I was going to know what defense, development, and diplomacy was? Absolutely not. Did I have a full circle view of how the history that I really like taking from some of my professors and teachers, how that was going to be relevant to dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict right now? Absolutely not. But these are life experiences that you get as you're doing the work. And you can, when you do it from a 30,000-foot view and you work together and collectively with people who are doing it, very focused, you can build a community. And I mean, this building, as I walked in, I saw this building was built by a community of physicians who decided that they wanted to be part of something larger. And so everyone will find their own community. I know y'all will find your own community. But for me, I think having a liberal arts background and understanding how that interrelates with other STEM-focused professionals that you will work with is an incredibly important part of work. So thank you. I appreciate it.
We welcome at this time Adam Stulberg, who serves as the Sam Nunn School Chair and Professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs here at Georgia Tech. Please join me in welcoming Adam Stulberg.
Is this on? Am I on? Is it working? Well, please give it up again for Paige. Needless to say, this is a very tough act to follow because she's just so wonderful. She's just done so many different things and really made a difference in the globe. Georgia Tech's mantra is to try to advance the global human condition, and you really epitomize it. as you've made such a difference in the world of global development, post-conflict reconciliation, the advancement of democracy, human rights, and civil society really across the globe. And like I said, this is a tough act to follow, and of course your remarks really beg a question. What are we doing at the Sam Nunn School in particular to generate the knowledge and experience, to transfer that knowledge, and to create practical opportunities for our students to be put on that kind of pathway to make a difference on the global and heady issues of the day, ranging from, at which science and technology is at the nexus, that relate to geopolitical competition with China, to advancement of political and economic development, both within and across the global north and south, to governance and security in outer space. So how are we actually doing it? Well, let me just take a few minutes to tell you that really the secret sauce lies in the fact that the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech today is not what it was years ago, and it's not what you find at most schools of higher education. Because through concerted and refined efforts to address our curriculum, by embracing being at a world-class institution of engineering and sciences, and with concerted efforts to infuse our curriculum with a welter of practical and experiential learning opportunities, the school now is really fit for purpose to tackle some of the grand challenges of the world so that our students can indeed make a difference. So in the few minutes that I have, I want to take you down a road to highlight 3 different ways that we are doing this and that distinguish us, and why students and others will want to get engaged with us more. So the first thing to appreciate is that unlike most of our peers as professional schools of international relations, we reside in a sea of engineering and sciences, and from computer science to basic science and physics, etc. And as a result, it creates an opportunity for us. It creates an opportunity for us to bring the rigors of our own training in the social sciences, and particularly political science and economics in some cases, to bring our strategic, our comparative, our political economy, our cross-cultural perspectives to bear on heady, cross-national, international, transnational problems like the ones that I mentioned before. And to do that in a rigorous and systematic way by engaging with qualitative and quantitative methods, increasingly to bring computational or data and visual analytics to bring those international relations alive. So on the one hand, being at Georgia Tech allows us to really do what we do best in bringing out these social science perspectives. But also at Georgia Tech, it gives us an opportunity to really zoom in on those 3 legs that Paige mentioned. In particular, our curriculum brings that talent, as I mentioned, and that expertise together as a fulcrum in 3 kind of areas where we have synergies between research, teaching, and outreach. One has to do with where emerging technologies are impacting international security. And you just have to read the headlines from the papers today and yesterday to realize how that is dramatically affecting stability in the Middle East, in East Asia, and here at home. The other thing that we're doing is, the other cluster that we have is global development and sustainability, which is, Paige mentioned, another critical dimension. And the third cluster we have, which of course we're at Georgia Tech, we call International Affairs in Science and Technology, and that's where we bring our comparative strategic governance perspectives to understanding heady issues related to international energy and environmental security, international economic, regulatory, innovation, and competitiveness issues, and of course, outer space governance and security issues, among others. And so those are the 3 sort of clusters where we have brought our deep expertise to bear at a place like Georgia Tech, and it maps very nicely onto a lot of the technical expertise. So that's number 1. So number 1 is really, we bring both a rigorous and rich approach to understanding international relations that is really maps nicely, as I mentioned, onto Georgia Tech. Number 2 is that because we are at Georgia Tech And because of the wide expanse of interest in understanding the nexus of science and technology, we can do two things. We can ask why questions. Why do small states fight big states? Why is it that remote sensing can make a difference in facilitating global development in one part of the world, but may compound the problems in another part of the world? Those why questions are what animate political scientists and international relations scholars in general. But what we can do through our multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary engagements and partnerships with others across campus is that we can unravel a lot of the how questions as well. And we can integrate why with how to have a much more nuanced understanding of what is it about a certain emerging technology, AI, hypersonic missile, drone. What is it about it that may make it a strategic concern and exacerbate vulnerability and insecurity in different parts of the world versus something that's going to ultimately have much more of a modest impact, and maybe its greatest value added will be in the commercial sector. So how do we parse these things? And the only way we can parse these things is by merging the how and why questions. And we do that at the school through a variety of things. One is a variety of interdisciplinary activities. And one of them has been the establishment of minors with mechanical engineering and global development, and with urban planning and economics as well at the graduate level. We've created graduate certificates with aerospace, nuclear engineering, increasingly with computer science to explore how these how questions in these technical domains shape strategic, comparative governance issues in our domains. The other element that we do to bring out this interdisciplinary and this interaction between the why and how is a focus on not just courses that are antiseptically look at conditions and structural factors, but also the processes. So we have increasingly courses on diplomacy and negotiation, on the national security making process, on the assessment process for global development. So infusing our curriculum with these with the process-oriented dimensions is a second way that we're realizing that opportunity to put people on a trajectory for such a remarkable career. The third element or the third, I should say, leg in the stool, if you will, for us, is the fact that we are embracing, and we've always embraced, very practical experiential learning in our curriculum. Again, Georgia Tech is where things get done. Right? What we do is not only look at these big, heady issues from strategic, comparative, institutional, cross-cultural perspectives, but we want to understand how policies are actually formulated and implemented and what comes out of that. And to do that, you really need to understand how practitioners understand, conceive of a problem, turn that problem into an applied solution, absorb that solution through their bureaucracies, institutions, strategies, deploy that solution, assess that solution. And there are a whole host of professional opportunities in that space, and as a result, we've made sure that those perspectives are captured in our study abroad programs, be it in Europe, where you learn from the actual decision makers, both inside the governments and in the non-governmental communities and the societal communities. They're making a difference in transatlantic relationship. Those who are involved in turning soccer as a sport into a critical instrument for community and global development. We're going to be launching a new program in East Asia that's going to look at the geopolitical risk to global supply chains. Again, ripped right out of the headlines. And you have to understand the processes of linking some of these technologies, how we envision these technologies, to how these technologies create these types of outcomes. So our study abroad programs are an example of that. Another example of that, of course, is our capstone courses. And we have capstones across our curriculum where students bring together their learning experience across their degrees and certificate programs and present their findings to mentors, to professionals for practical assessment. We have introduced 7 distinguished professors of the practice who have had experience making decisions at the highest level of government and private sector and the non-governmental sector. And we've complemented that increasingly with those who actually sit at the table behind them that formulate and implement those processes, be that in the world of diplomacy, in the world of intelligence, and global development. So we are bringing practitioners to us, not just preparing our students to go to practitioners. Of course, we have joint appointed faculty across the Institute that also bring not only an interdisciplinary but a practical experience. We have also partnered with the School of Public Policy to be a leader in the Pathways to DC, where we're actually not just teaching and doing all of those things here on campus, but helping to take folks to DC to really learn how to navigate that terrain for their professional careers. Most recently, we've also introduced a professional education program that allows us to take this learning, this holistic, systematic, rich, rigorous, why-based, how-based curricula to people in place, in situ, where they are, be they working at a defense company, be they out in the field trying to get a water filtration system deployed in one part of the world that seemed to work in another part of the world, but it's not working where they are, or at a military base in downtime trying to understand why it is that they're being deployed where they are. So this is what the Nunn School is today. The Nunn School is an entity on campus that is now generating not only scholarly and basic knowledge, but practical knowledge to help our students and the next generation not only tackle some of these issues, but also help Georgia Tech punch above its weight in bringing the vast skill set in science and technology to be deployed to address those heady questions. And that's why I've not only been here for 27 years and still signed up for another who knows how many years, why I'm so bullish on where the school is now and the trajectory we're on, but also why I'm very proud of the legacy we're leaving Senator Nunn and for the Institute in general. So thank you.